What if the world's most important shipping lane, the one that keeps your fuel affordable, your shelves stocked, and global trade alive, was about to be shut down by a group of fighters operating out of one of the poorest countries on Earth? What if I told you that this is not a future scenario? What if I told you it is already happening right now, while most people scroll past the headlines without truly understanding what is at stake? Stay with me, because what you are about to hear will completely change how you see this conflict. The Middle East has been described as a powder keg for decades. Politicians, analysts, and generals have used that phrase so many times it has almost lost its meaning. But here is the difference between before and now. The fuse is no longer being lit, it has already burned down, and the explosion we are watching unfold in slow motion has a name: Yemen. Most people look at Yemen and see chaos, poverty, and civil war, a country broken by years of internal conflict. But that surface-level picture is dangerously incomplete, because beneath that broken surface, a highly organized Iran-backed military force has quietly built one of the most disruptive asymmetric warfare capabilities in modern history. And right now, they are using it. The Houthi movement, officially known as Ansarallah, has just made a declaration that has sent shockwaves through military command rooms from Washington to Riyadh to Tel Aviv. They have officially entered the Iran-Israel-US conflict on the side of Tehran. This is not a symbolic gesture, and it is not a bluff. This is a strategic military escalation that changes the entire architecture of the war. To understand why this matters, you need to understand who the Houthis actually are, because mainstream media has spent years underselling them. They are not just a rebel group hiding in mountain caves. They are a battle-hardened, ideologically driven military organization that has been fighting a full-scale war against Saudi Arabia, the most heavily armed Arab nation on earth, for nearly a decade, and they are still standing. The Houthis emerged from northern Yemen in the early 1990s as a religious and political movement rooted in Zaydi Shia Islam. Over time, they evolved from a political voice into an armed resistance force, one that received extensive military training, weapons, drones, and missile technology directly from Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. By 2014, they had seized Yemen's capital, Sana'a, and by 2015, they were at war with a Saudi-led coalition backed by the United States. That coalition has bombed Yemen for nearly 10 years, and the Houthis have not been defeated. Here is the part most people miss during that decade of war. The Houthis did not just survive. They adapted, upgraded, and expanded their military doctrine. They developed long-range ballistic missiles capable of hitting Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure. They built an entire fleet of kamikaze drones that have struck targets hundreds of kilometers away. They have demonstrated the ability to hit oil tankers, military vessels, and commercial cargo ships with precision, using technology supplied by Iran and developed domestically. This is not a group that throws rocks. This is a non-state military force with capabilities that rival some national armies, and now they have officially pointed that entire arsenal at the global shipping lane the world depends on. The question is not whether they can cause damage, they already have. The moment of official escalation came when Houthi Supreme Leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi delivered a direct, unambiguous address to the world. He stated that Yemen stands fully aligned with Iran and the Palestinian cause, and that any vessel connected to Israel, the United States, or their allies would be considered a legitimate military target. This was not a press release, and it was not a negotiating position. It was a declaration of active military participation in a regional war. What triggered this move requires context that goes beyond Yemen's borders. Iran has been executing a multi-front pressure strategy, using proxy forces across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and now Yemen to stretch us and Israeli military attention across multiple theaters simultaneously. The goal is not necessarily to win a single battle. The goal is to overwhelm, exhaust, and economically bleed the opposition across many fronts at once. Yemen is now the southern front of that strategy. Houthi leadership made clear that their entry into the conflict is not conditional on any ceasefire or diplomatic development. They have committed to sustained military operations for as long as Iran remains in conflict, which means this is not a short-term escalation. This is a long-term strategic alignment that completely transforms the threat landscape in the Red Sea, and that has one specific, devastating implication: Bab El Mandeb. The connection between Yemen's war entry and the global economy runs directly through that narrow stretch of water. Every analyst, every admiral, and every shipping executive in the world is now watching that choke point with extreme concern. Because the Houthis are not just making noise, they have positioned themselves directly on its doorstep, and what happens at that doorstep affects every country on Earth. Pull up any map of global shipping routes, and your eye will immediately be drawn to a narrow passage at the southern tip of the Red Sea. That passage, just 29 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, is called Bab El Mandeb in Arabic. The name translates to the Gate of Tears. History, it seems, has always known what this place is capable of. Approximately 12 to 15% of all global trade passes through Bab El Mandeb every single year. That includes nearly 6 million barrels of oil per day, massive container ships carrying electronics, food, medicine, and manufactured goods, and military vessels maintaining regional presence. It is the critical link between the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, and from the Red Sea, ships pass through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean and onward to Europe. Block Bab El Mandeb, and you have effectively cut one of the world's most important economic arteries. The reason this choke point is so strategically significant is that there is no easy alternative. Ships that cannot pass through Bab El Mandeb must reroute around the entire African continent, adding approximately 3,500 extra nautical miles to their journey. That translates into 2 to 3 additional weeks of travel time. Significantly higher fuel costs and massive disruptions to delivery schedules. For industries that run on just-in-time supply chains, this is not an inconvenience, it is a crisis. Yemen sits directly on the eastern shore of this passage. From the highlands and coastlines that Houthi forces control, they have a direct line of sight and a direct line of fire to any vessel passing through. That geographic reality is not a coincidence, it is a strategic asset that Iran and the Houthis have clearly recognized and are now actively exploiting. The Gate of Tears is living up to its name. The warnings came first. For months, Houthi officials made public statements threatening to target vessels associated with Israel and its allies if the Gaza conflict continued. Most shipping companies, governments, and analysts treated these statements as political theater, the kind of aggressive rhetoric that armed groups often use. For domestic mobilization without necessarily following through, they were wrong. The attacks began in late 2023 and have continued with increasing frequency and sophistication ever since. The Houthis have used Iranian-supplied anti-ship ballistic missiles, attack drones, and naval mines to strike at commercial vessels transiting the Red Sea. Several ships have been hit, some have been seized, and at least one has been sunk. Crew members have been taken hostage. Cargo has been lost. Insurers have panicked. What makes these attacks particularly alarming from a military standpoint is not just their frequency, it is their precision. The Houthis demonstrated the ability to identify, track, and hit a moving vessel in open water using drone and missile technology. This is a capability that many far wealthier nations do not possess. It signals that whatever resources Iran has invested in Yemen's military development, the returns are now being felt on a global scale. The pattern of escalation is also deeply concerning. Each wave of attacks has been slightly more sophisticated, slightly better coordinated, and slightly harder to intercept than the last. The Houthis are learning in real time, adapting their tactics based on what Western naval defenses are doing to stop them. This is not random violence. This is a deliberate military campaign designed to impose maximum economic cost with minimum military exposure. When ships stop moving through a critical choke point, the consequences do not stay in the region, they travel around the entire world at the speed of commerce. Oil prices respond first, and they respond fast. Any sustained disruption to the flow of crude through the Red Sea corridor sends immediate shockwaves through energy markets. Because traders price in not just current supply but future risk. And right now, the risk premium on Red Sea transit is rising every single week. Major shipping companies, including Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, and MSC, which together control a significant share of global container shipping, have already begun rerouting their vessels away from the Red Sea entirely. They are sending ships around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa instead. That adds approximately 10 to 14 days to each voyage, and with thousands of vessels making that calculation simultaneously, the cumulative cost to global trade is staggering. Analysts estimate the additional rerouting costs are running into billions of dollars per month across the industry. Supply chains that were already fragile from the COVID disruptions are being tested again. European manufacturers who depend on Asian components are seeing delivery delays. Retailers are adjusting inventory strategies. Energy companies are recalculating their hedging positions. And here is the part that connects this directly to everyday people. When shipping costs rise, consumer prices rise. When oil supply routes are disrupted, fuel costs rise. When supply chains are delayed, the products people buy every day, from clothing to electronics to food, all get more expensive. This is not abstract geopolitics. This is inflation arriving through the back door, carried in on the wings of a regional conflict most people barely follow. The United States did not watch the Red Sea situation develop without responding. In late 2023, Washington assembled a multinational naval coalition named Operation Prosperity Guardian to protect commercial shipping in the Red Sea and deter further Houthi attacks. The coalition included naval forces from the UK, Bahrain, Canada, France, and several other nations. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, and advanced missile defense systems were deployed to intercept incoming drone and missile attacks. American and British forces began conducting airstrikes against Houthi military infrastructure inside Yemen, targeting missile storage facilities, drone launch sites, radar installations, and command centers. These strikes were presented publicly as a defensive and deterrence measure. But here is the strategic problem that military analysts have been raising from the beginning. You cannot bomb a guerrilla movement into submission when it controls mountainous terrain, enjoys genuine popular support, and has a continuous supply chain of weapons flowing in from Iran. The strikes have degraded some Houthi capabilities, but they have not stopped the attacks. Saudi Arabia, which spent billions of dollars and nearly a decade trying to defeat the Houthis militarily, is watching this situation with a particular kind of exhausted recognition. Riyadh knows better than almost anyone what it means to underestimate the Houthis' resilience and strategic patience. Saudi Arabia has quietly shifted toward a diplomatic posture with Yemen in recent months, and that shift tells you something important about how Riyadh now calculates the cost of continued confrontation. The kingdom that once led the anti-Houthi coalition is no longer interested in being on the front line. NATO allies are on alert, intelligence sharing is intensifying, and the US Navy is burning enormous resources intercepting relatively inexpensive Houthi drones with multi-million-dollar missiles. That economic exchange ratio, cheap drones versus expensive interceptors, is itself a form of warfare. And right now it is a math problem that the Western alliance has not yet solved. The question is not whether the current response is happening, it clearly is. The question is whether it is working. Now we arrive at the question that matters most: what happens next? And the honest answer is that there are three distinct paths this situation could take, and each one carries very different implications for the region and the world. Understanding these three scenarios is not about predicting the future with certainty. It is about preparing your thinking for the range of possibilities that now sit on the table. The first scenario is full regional escalation. If Iran and Israel move toward direct, sustained military confrontation, which several recent exchanges have already come close to, then Yemen becomes one node in a multi-front war that draws in us forces, destabilizes the Gulf, and sends energy markets into a shock that the global economy is not prepared to absorb. In this scenario, Bab El Mandeb does not just become disrupted, it becomes a full military theater. The economic consequences would be generational. The second scenario is diplomatic de-escalation. Quiet back-channel negotiations, potentially involving Qatar, Oman, or China, all of whom have maintained communication lines with Tehran, could create conditions for a managed ceasefire. This would not resolve the underlying tensions, but it could reduce the immediate military temperature enough to allow shipping to resume and markets to stabilize. This is the scenario that governments are publicly working toward, even while privately preparing for the worst. The third scenario, and perhaps the most likely based on historical patterns, is a prolonged low-intensity conflict. No full-scale war, no clean peace deal, just a sustained grinding disruption where the Houthis continue periodic attacks, the US Navy continues to intercept most of them, shipping companies continue to reroute around Africa, and the global economy slowly absorbs a permanent new layer of friction and cost. This is the scenario where nothing explodes dramatically, but everything quietly gets more expensive, more fragile, and more uncertain over time. Zoom out and look at what this moment actually represents. The world is watching a small, impoverished nation, armed by a regional power, hold the global economy at partial ransom through the single most strategic geographic chokepoint in maritime trade. It is a profound reminder that in an interconnected world, the most powerful pressure points are not always held by the most powerful nations. And for those of you who are paying attention to the bigger picture, the slow fracturing of global trade systems, the rising instability in the arteries of commerce, the way regional conflicts bleed into economic reality, this is not just a news story. This is a signal that the systems the modern world built its prosperity on are under a level of pressure that they have rarely faced before. And the people who understand that signal, who see the connection between a narrow stretch of water in the Middle East and the price of everything in their own lives, those are the people who will navigate what comes next with clarity rather than confusion. If you found this analysis valuable, I want to hear your perspective. Do you think diplomacy can still pull this back from the edge, or is full escalation now inevitable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This community thinks deeply, and your perspective matters. And if you want to keep receiving calm, strategic analysis of the events shaping our world, subscribe, because there is much more coming that you will not want to miss.